Welcome to the RGLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to discuss the current recession in the quote-unquote free world. Obviously, these countries include America's main allies, and they can also be considered, they are also referred to, in fact, as the collective West, and most of them are, if not all of them, are on Russia's list of unfriendly countries. The reason that I want to do this podcast is that data has just come out for the Q1 GDP of 2022, which has shown that, quote-unquote, unexpectedly, but even though it is quite unsurprising, GDP in the United States contracted in this quarter by a 1.4% annualized rate. In France, GDP remained the same, so it was quote-unquote stagnant. And in the Eurozone, the GDP grew by 0.2%, and in the EU, in a whole, the growth was at 0.4%. Obviously, these numbers are not to be trusted because all countries understate their inflation numbers. And if we use a more realistic level of inflation to adjust the economic growth, the GDP, the growth numbers will be more negative. There will be a more severe contraction in the United States, and in the Eurozone it will also be a contraction. Well, by the way, at the same time, inflation is running high and the interest rates remain at zero. So I find this the right time to discuss this issue. So I'm going to divide today's podcast into two sections. First, I want to list 5 reasons why I think this is going to worsen. 2, I want to also discuss why I think that there is no solution and what the outcome would be. So first things first, why I think the situation is going to worsen. 5 reasons. First, there is a high and growing inflation in these economies. Obviously, I'm not saying that it's only in the collective West where inflation is a problem. Inflation is also a problem in a lot of the other economies, especially in Turkey, in Lebanon, in a lot of the Latin American countries where there have been structural inflation for a very long time, but since we are focusing more on the free world, I think these countries have a severe problem, which was the result of quantitative easing for over a decade. Now, this is itself a problem that cannot easily be solved. And with high and growing inflation, there will be disruptions in the supply chain. There will be a darkening of the mood in the economy so that consumer spending will go down, will continue to fall. And even though, what they purchase will fall, but, as cost goes up, what the consumers have to pay in all may not necessarily fall too much. But as the price for essential goods go up, their disposable income will come down, and this will of course weigh heavy on the overall economic growth. And a very important mechanism between economic growth and inflation is in the monetary policy, because the governments will probably want to use monetary stimulus to try to, mitigate the decline or contraction in the economy. And this will, of course, worsen inflation. And then, of course, worsening inflation will worsen the economy. It's really a feedback loop. And the second reason is, of course, the stimulus never works. Monetary stimulus does not work when the economy is contracting. I have discussed this in a previous podcast several months ago, and perhaps even last year, that monetary stimulus only works to a certain extent when the economy is just starting to recover from a recession. That is when the economic activities are really just starting to pick up space, and when lenders are still hesitant to lend. This is when, if you make a more accommodative monetary policy available, this will unleash more funds, more capital into the economy, which is picking up speed, and this will have a positive effect on the recovery and the following economic growth as a result. But when the economy is contracting, people are unwilling to borrow money. At this point, having more money made available, more capital available, does not mean that more money will go into the real economy, right? The difference here, if you can see, when the economy is recovering, there is demand for capital, but there is very tight supply. So now with a very tight supply of money, you inject money, maybe it helps. But now there is people are exiting, right? They are taking off their risks. So now there is an oversupply of capital without any place to go. Having more money is not going to help with the economic situation. On the contrary, it's going to worsen the inflation problem, which will worsen the economic problem. All right, this is the second reason. The third reason is the West's pet project in offense. They call it defense, but military, let's say military spending. Military adventurism. Military adventurism is a hallmark of falling empires. As empires decline, their leaders become more, unleashed. No, not unleashed. What is it? Unhinged. Sorry. Because I think the main reason is because their perception of their power no longer reflects the reality, and their inflated egos cannot adjust to their falling influence, and they need to compensate for that by engaging in military adventurism. We are seeing this. In fact, the Liz Truss, I think is the foreign minister of the United States, United Kingdom, Britain. I think that's what she is. Has made a speech saying that NATO should expand to the Asia-Pacific region, that it should protect the freedom and all the what is it called? These nonsense, all these ideological nonsense that she just repeated. Obviously, as a lot of the commentators have suggested, she is aiming for the top job. She She wants Boris Johnson's job, and maybe she will get it because people who are more astute, people who are wiser, can see that Britain is going to go through a very tough patch, and they don't want anything to do with it. But Liz Truss, not having the insight, wants the job now, and she probably will get it simply because she is perhaps one of the least capable person out there, and just as Kamala Harris is the preferred candidate to replace Biden, I think Liz Truss is the preferred candidate to replace Boris Johnson. Anyways, so with these large range of pet projects, military adventurism, we're going to see that funds get wasted in these meaningless projects. These projects are going to drain funds that that could be used in the real economy, and at the same time they will have to adapt the industrial production to military to the military applications, and this will also worsen the consumer price inflation, and of course it will lower the quality of life, the standard of living in these countries that engage in military adventurism. It has always been the case, and this will mean a prolonged recession. So this is the third reason. The fourth reason is that pessimism is really setting in. We're seeing that a lot of the big American tech companies and a lot of the retailers, online retailers, and online and physical retailers are posting very poor numbers. Of course, a lot of the tech companies are massaging their data, but I think it seems it is really difficult to hide, in fact, the difficulty that they are encountering. I'm not going to go into too many details, but it suffices to say that consumers are becoming more pessimistic about the immediate future. They are spending less. They want to keep some savings around in case things worsen. At the same time, a lot of the companies are also adapting to a more pessimistic outlook. So they are adjusting their inventory policies, their inventory strategy. They are adapting their supply chains that make it less cost efficient. And all these things add up to making a overall less efficient world economy. I must say that even though I also criticize people who are who have benefited from globalization, I must say that the idea of having a global supply chain, having free trade globally, I think is economically efficient. More or less, it is efficient. The problem is that a lot of the people who abuse their monopolistic oligopolistic positions have changed the rules, and they have set up barriers. They have lobbied a lot of the countries, the legislatures in the quote-unquote free world, and they used basically imperialist methods in the developing nations. And all in all, it is the globalization that we have had for the last couple of decades has increasingly become really new imperialism. That's where it's bad, right? But if a globalized supply chain, a globalized economic system can be made fair, then it would be more efficient. And being more pessimistic and having a system, a global economy divided into 2, 3, 4 different parts that have very little linkages amongst each other is overall inefficient. And this inefficiency means that productivity will fall. With lower productivity, the economic output will fall. With rising inflation, higher cost, lower productivity, the standard of living will fall. And so this is the fourth reason. And and the last reason, the fifth reason, is simply that the collective West has some competitors, right? And these competitors, some of them, I'm not going to name them, and I don't actually know that they absolutely will do this, but there is an opportunity for a lot of these competitors to come in for the kill. The biggest target is, in my judgment, the Eurozone. The Eurozone is unstable. Is unstable. Its currency is weak. Its currency is not really a hard currency. It is mistakenly thought of as a hard currency, but I think it lacks a lot of the attributes that hard currencies must have. Namely, I think hard currencies need to number one, be freely convertible. 2, it needs to be secure. And 3, it needs to be relatively stable. And 4th, and very importantly, it needs to be backed by something, right? The dollar has long been backed by gold, and had long been backed by gold, and then later on backed by oil. And before the dollar became the world's reserve currency, a lot of the major currencies in the world were backed fully or partially by gold or other commodities. You need to have something to back the currencies. But the euro lacks 2, I think, of these traits. Number 1, of course, is backed by nothing. And number 2, it's not safe because your euros can be frozen if the politicians in Europe find that you are from a certain country, that you hold a nationality that they disapprove of. That means that it's also not a very safe currency. What the euro still has, it also lacks another thing, which is stability. I think it has been relatively stable for the last 2 decades. But I think that in this year, the next couple of years, the euro will be rather weak and weakening. I could be wrong here, but this is a question mark at least. And lastly, the euro is freely convertible, so it still has something. But without being able to fulfill these all 4 points, I don't think it should be considered a hard currency. It's anyways. So I think that's the 5th reason. So for these 5 reasons, I think the recession is going to worsen. It's going to be long. It's not transitory. The only thing transitory is this phase, meaning that there is still a phase where it is possible to pretend that the recession is a temporary thing that is not going to last, that this is just something that is caused by supply chain issues. But what really is, the fact is that supply chain issues is only a symptom of rising inflation. And as inflation continues to rise, the supply chain problems will worsen. And as the overall economic situation worsens, a lot of the key players in the ever so complicated supply chains will be defunct. They will go bankrupt. We will see worsening supply chain problems. So they can always blame on supply chains, right up until every link in the supply chain breaks down. Then you can't say that we have everything but that, right? You have nothing but problems. Then that will be actually close to the end of the recession. This goes to the second point. I want to say that solution doesn't exist. The second part of today's podcast, I want to say that basically the solution doesn't exist, because these 5 points, if we look at them, there is no simple way to resolve most of them. I think it's in fact unrealistic to expect these factors to just go away. So there will be a prolonged recession. And this could be much worse than the Great Depression of roughly a century ago, less than a century ago. I think it can be like that, or perhaps even worse, right? And but when will it become better? I think the only solution or the only outcome that I can see is that when the economy contracts, the standard of living falls, and as the standard of living falls, and as inflation goes up, there comes a point when labor and raw materials become cheap again, right? Relative to money, right? It becomes cheap again because the wages will, in real terms, will become low. People will will spend less, and eventually it will come to a point when it becomes profitable again to engage in economic activities. Before then, I think it's not going to happen. I think this is the way forward. I don't see that there is a monetary policy that can be implemented that solves this problem. I don't think so. Of course, a lot of the people can hope in Europe, as I said in my previous podcast, perhaps just the last one, that a lot of people in Europe probably are hoping, right? They are hoping that they will be able to destroy Russia and they will be able to pillage Russia, and by doing so, they will be able to overcome their economic problems. And I think if they could militarily defeat Russia, they might be able to, in fact, do it. But I don't think they are capable of defeating Russia militarily. So this is a non-starter. And in fact, as they bet more on this game, I think they are going to lose more, and the recession will be deeper, and things will get worse. Having said all that, so that's basically, let me just stop here. This is today's main podcast. I also want to, I wanted to make some comments about lockdowns in China, but that's really just my speculation, right? I just want to say that a lot of people, I've seen some people who have made speculations that China are doing these lockdowns specifically to disrupt the supply chain in order to worsen the economic situation in the collective West. I don't know. I'm not entirely certain that this is actually the case, but it's a plausible case. But I don't actually think that's really what's happening. I think briefly, China overall has a very bureaucratic system. I think the system really had. I think a lot of the early communists who designed this system, they borrowed a lot from Russia, from the Soviet Union, and a lot of them also had studied in France, so they also borrowed some from France. Neither country, France or the Soviet Union, was known for, or is known, or can be known for their efficiency. So I think there is simply a highly structured bureaucracy in China, and as the official policy of the central government is to have a tight control on the virus situation, I think that lower level governments interpret the quote unquote spirit of the central government differently, and this leads to a lot of on their part, a lot of risk aversion, which has led to a lot of the unnecessarily tough actions. And I think as this bureaucracy is set up in such a way that really the central government does not have direct control on the daily operations of the local governments, I think that's what is causing a lot of the disparity in the reaction or responses to the situation. Now, a lot of it cannot, if we view it from the outside objectively, in a holistic picture, we cannot say that it is justifiable logically, by logic, but we need to understand that it is probably just a matter of bureaucracy, risk aversion, let's say, the risk aversion of lower tier government officials in a highly bureaucratic system. This is an inefficiency of the system. But nevertheless, it is not to say that similar situations cannot be replicated in a lot of the more less bureaucratic systems. Because if we have a less bureaucratic system that is nevertheless democratic, then a lot of the politicians will always look at the polls, and insofar as there is popular support for tough activities, tough actions, tough lockdowns, then we are going to see that these politicians, even without bureaucratic system, will still implement actions that are not necessarily reasonable. Right. So that's my side comment on today's podcast. I think that's probably all I want to say. Probably in the next week or two, I will make another podcast. I think on that one, maybe I will talk about the Russian and Ukrainian situation, because I think there has some development. Actually, I think things are starting to pick up speed as the Russians have apparently adapted their strategy in Ukraine. I think perhaps in a week's time, there will be some significant movement and some significant changes in the Donbass region. That could be something that is worthy of a new discussion. So thank you very much for listening to this podcast. I encourage you to, of course, subscribe, like, and comment. Don't forget that I have a Telegram channel. I will give the link in the description below. Thanks for listening and have a great day.